So we're going to start with the recipe. So what I've got is I've got 1.5 cups of quinoa flour. Now quinoa flour, not that I'm some sort of flour mystic, but quinoa flour is an Aztec grain. It's grown at the top of the mountain, and amaranth is grown at the bottom. And this is a really nice sort of little story. It's a leaf plant. So it's actually related to the rhubarb and spinach family. That's why it works together with cakes and, as a gluten-free ingredient when doing pasta. Because it's related to the rhubarb and spinach family, it webs really nicely like a leaf. So then it layers on top of each other when you're baking. It's really nice and fluffy, so it's not going to go like rubber. And when I explain that to people, they all of a sudden go, oh, that clicks. So then they can think about how they use that in that different application. I buy my grain from Peru and ship it in as whole grain to Australia. And there's a gorgeous stone mill in Victoria that's Australia's only stone mill. And he mills it for me to what we call, or what I call, the Rowie fluff factor. So the quinoa, excuse my fingers, is quite sort of fluffy. So, and it's really beautiful with baking as well, and quite sort of dusty. So we've got 1.5 cups of quinoa flour. We're back with this at Rowie's Cakes every day. So 1.5 cups of quinoa flour, and then you've got a cup of caster sugar. I prefer to use organic, but don't necessarily have that luxury on a daily basis. So we're just going to sort of get the flour and the sugar to become friends and combine those up a bit. So when they start to become friends, you're on a really sort of low speed. You can sort of turn that off, and then we want to put in some teaspoon of baking powder. And what I've got here is I've got the most gorgeous cocoa. This cocoa is like liquid gold. So it's basically 1/3 cup of cocoa powder. It's my trusty Tupperware little measuring spoons. And cocoa powder has an explosive reaction, so you've really got to be very careful with cocoa powder when you're adding it to different recipes, particularly if you're using it in a pancake recipe or something. You can't sort of add cocoa powder at the beginning when everything's combining, because it is a little bit like its own little pocket rocket about to sort of go off. So we'll just turn that up a little bit. Now we get to the tricky part. Because that's all blending, now we're going to create an egg. So what I've got is I've got some secret ingredients here. So I've got 1 cup of cold coffee. So 1 cup of cold coffee, 1/2 cup of vegetable oil. Now bear in mind, if I say vegetable oil in a recipe, particularly when it's gluten-free, I mean vegetable oil, because oils have different properties. So olive oil is different to vegetable oil, etc., etc. So I had a few people that were trying to bake cakes using olive oil, and they said, oh, it tastes very nutty. Well, of course it tastes nutty, because you're using olives instead of vegetables. So yeah, so just bear that in mind. And then we've got some white vinegar and also some gorgeous vanilla. So these are going to combine to create our egg. Now, I don't know whether or not you would be old enough or young enough to understand this, but when you're a child, or I did anyway, you get a glass of lemonade and you put the ice cream in, and they call it a spider, and it fizzes up like that. Well, that's what we're going to create here, and that will basically sort of give you your egg. So if we pour in our water first, or coffee, so that's 1 cup of coffee, and we'll just turn this up. So that's combining nicely, and I can smell the cocoa powder now, which is really nice. So in here, I'm going to actually add a teaspoon of vanilla to the oil. pour that in. And that's blending around quite nicely. Now, the vinegar is going to get everything together and pull everything together from there. So as soon as you put your vinegar in, your mixture will change colour just a little bit, which will be quite nice when it changes colour. But that's when we've got to act quickly and really go to our baking pan. So that's combining quite nicely. We'll just turn that on high for about 30 seconds. And in the meantime, what we needed to do was just to check that our oven is sitting on about 180 degrees in fan force, which it is. So, but I just thought I'd remind you. So we turn that down. Now look who wants to lick the bowl? So this looks yummy. So this is always the hardest part. So I remember once one of my first cooking demos whisking egg into the audience. It was very fun. So now what we're going to do is take my gorgeous mini loaf tins here, and we're going to spoon the mix into there. I'll just remove some of these ingredients. Okay, just blend in anything that's sort of remaining on the bottom of the bowl. So this is quite unusual for me, because when we're cooking cakes at Rowie's Cakes, we cook enough to bake 550 cakes at a time out of a bowl. So my bowl in my factory is about that high and about that wide. So using 20 kilo bags of quinoa flour at the one time. So it's quite interesting. So we'll just pour this in. So the last thing you want with any sort of cake mix is for it to be bubbly. That means that there's something internally wrong with the science of the mixture. So this actually will make 6 mini loaves, or you could actually do like a loaf tin cake, or a small like 20 centimetre or 15 centimetre round cake. So there's the bowl for somebody to have a nice little morning tea with, and we're just going to take these straight to the oven. And we're going to leave those little babies in there to bake for about 25 to 30 minutes, and we'll come back.